If you've ever waited for a party invite that clearly should have come while pretending you were just having a quiet evening at home on purpose, well, congratulations! You already understand Edwardian society. This is how to get invited like an Edwardian lady without looking desperate. Rule number 1, the invitation game. You don't just show up at the ball, darling. Dear modern gentlefolk and aspiring social strategists, let us begin our descent into the lace-trimmed labyrinth of Edwardian society, where tea was strong and being seen mattered far more than being sincere. For the upper-class Edwardian woman, getting invited was everything, not just to a party, but to the party. The one hosted by Lady So-and-so, whose second cousin is in Parliament, and where being seated next to a Viscount was only slightly more important than being seated at all. But here's the trick. You had to act like you never really wanted to go in the first place. Because the real currency was being seen, not seeking. You see, invitations were more than social favors. They were endorsements, status symbols. They were the 1908 equivalent of that little blue check mark on your Instagram profile. To be invited was to be known. To not be invited was to be invisible, or even worse, unimportant. It was during the important season, those glittering months between April and August, when London society bloomed with concerts, garden parties, and debutante balls. But one misstep in May could exile you to the Scottish countryside by June. But in true Edwardian fashion, one never asked for an invitation. That would have been the social equivalent of showing up to someone's wedding in a white gown and asking for a +1. Instead, you made yourself noticeable in all the right ways and in all the right places, so the invitation would find you naturally, as by divine providence, but maybe also by a little whisper from your aunt who knows the hostess's gardener. But how did Edwardian women get noticed without groveling? Well, let's talk about how these clever women earned those elusive invitations. One way was by church attendance, in the right pew, not too close to the front. That would look desperate. And not too far to the back. Oh no, now you're irrelevant. Let's take my hypothetical character, Miss Lilith Green. She knows better than to park herself in the first 3 rows. Those were reserved for aging dowagers and the painfully eager. Instead, she chose pew 5, invisible enough for Lady Cranley to nod approvingly, and humble enough to suggest she just happened to be there. Or perhaps scenario number 2, a polite mention in the society column for donating something tasteful to a charity fête, and bonus points if the cause was improving conditions for gentlewomen of reduced circumstances. See, Miss Lillian, she didn't scream for attention. She quietly donated a lace-trimmed handkerchief to a fundraiser and was rewarded with a single line in the local gazette. And it read, "Tasteful and entirely appropriate." Translation, she played it perfectly. And then there's scenario 3, a calling card left discreetly after a shared afternoon tea with no expectation, just a hint of interest after tea with Miss Lady Mortimer. But Miss Green, she didn't gush, nor did she linger. She simply placed her card atop the stack on the hall table. Not on top, that would be too bold. Not buried either, because that would be too forgettable. Just slightly askew, with the faintest whisper of violet perfume, enough to be remembered, never enough to seem calculated. And this was not not just socializing, it was a game. And the stakes were reputations, marriages, and sometimes even inheritances. A misstep could relegate you to spinsterdom, but a well-placed compliment, well, that could secure you a weekend at Chatsworth House, a sprawling aristocratic estate in Derbyshire, and a seat next to its heir. You weren't just attending events during this time, you were auditioning for a role in someone else's legacy. Similar to Regency author Jane Austen's heroines, who maneuvered the marriage market with wit. Edwardian women, they did the same, only with luncheon seating charts and velvet calling cards. Different tools, but the same social chessboard. Because no one admitted they were playing, but every Edwardian woman knew the rules. And if she did it, well, the consequences were swift. One too many laughs at the wrong pitch, one enthusiastic remark about the asparagus tongues, and suddenly, poof, she'd be left off of next week's guest list and would only reappear as a cautionary tale, whispered during communion. Let us now get through the gatekeepers to the power players, the ones pulling all the strings behind that silk-draped drawing room. These are the hostesses. So if the host was the king of the event, then the hostess was the prime minister, cloaked in chiffon and absolute authority. She was the one who decided who got in, where they sat, and whether they were offered tea or just simply observed drinking it from the far end of the room. These women, they weren't merely planning parties. They were orchestrating social ecosystems. They chose their guest list the way a general plans a battlefield. And this is no exaggeration. They had alliances, strategies, and zero tolerance for error. So imagine this. You arrive promptly at 4 o'clock for an afternoon tea. You've worn your second best muslin gown, elegant, not flashy, and your hat, it's wide enough to be noticed, but not so wide as to shade someone more important. You're shown into the drawing room where the air is thick with rose water and unspoken judgment. And as you take your seat, you realize something horrifying. You're at the card table, the far one across the room, near the girl with the unfortunate laugh and the spinster aunt who smells faintly of lavender and disappointment. Meanwhile, Lady So-and-so, the hostess, she's laughing airily at the fireplace with her inner circle. The witty one with the family fortune, the pretty one with the family title, and someone's very eligible nephew who just inherited half of Wiltshire. This, my friends, as I mentioned, is not socializing. This is chess. The clever guest, she doesn't push. She observes. She compliments. Gently, specifically, like, the arrangement of the chairs is delightful. So many hostesses forget the view when they focus on symmetry. It's harmless, it's elegant, and it says, I see what you did there, and I admire it. And after that compliment, if she gets lucky, she'll find herself moved up the list, from tea to dinner, or maybe even a weekend in the country, and all without ever appearing to try. Because in Edwardian society, ambition was acceptable, so long as it was dressed in restraint and powdered in charm. Because in an Edwardian world, obsessed with appearances, the clever woman knew virtue must outshine vanity. It was not the loudest, but the most composed who garnered trust. After all, what is charm without character, but merely decoration on an empty box? See, the clever Edwardian woman didn't ask to be invited. She became someone it was obvious you wanted to invite. So picture this. You're at a polite little garden party or a poetry reading, so curated it feels like the Royal Horticulture Society. The hostess, all soft smiles and steel instincts, is scanning the room like a general in chiffon. And you're not chasing her. You're letting her overhear you say, "The wisteria reminds me of the West Garden at my aunt's estate in Surrey." And in hearing that, she files that away. She knows your type. And voila, she remembers your name. Maybe. But more importantly, you didn't just socialize. You positioned subtly, strategically. And if you were especially clever, like our little Miss Lillian Green, you left your calling card with a slight tilt, just enough to catch her eye. A whisper of violet perfume, selling the impression, and a trace of mystery. A move that said, "I'm not trying, I'm just memorable." Now, let's bring in the Edwardian etiquette manuals, shall we? These rulebooks were more than instructional. They were practically sacred texts for the well-bred woman. Next to her Bible and her bonnet stood Manners for a Woman, a moral compass dressed in stiff binding and a polite euphemisms. In this book, there was warnings that even the wording and form of an invitation or reply should reflect one's breeding, noting that it was a great mistake to answer a friendly note with a formal one, and that replying improperly was not heinous, but certainly misunderstood. Formality, tone, and presentation also mattered, and appearing effortless but never thoughtless. You'll find the same message echoed in Miss Debrett's Etiquette of Good Society, which bluntly advised against requesting a ball invitation or a house party stay. It would reflect poorly on one's breeding. So what did you do if you weren't invited? Well, you were expected to act like you'd declined, on principle. Perhaps your mother was in half mourning, or you'd take up a charitable reading to the blind. Either way, you stayed above the fray, chin lifted and your dignity unbruised. And this wasn't just theory. Real women documented their social maneuvers in letters and diaries, tucked neatly between entries about bridge scores and new hat orders. A compliment at the right moment, a glance at the right man's joke, even a shared smile with the hostess over a discussion on the pre-Raphaelites. That could earn you a lifelong alliance, or at least a seat closer to the heir of the Chatsworth house, possibly next time. So, let's bring this back into focus. Today's version of an invitation might look like being seen in someone's Instagram story, untagged, in the background, no captions, just you, laughing quietly by the Macaron Tower. The Edwardian version, appearing in the society pages for donating a lace-trimmed handkerchief to a distressed gentlewoman, then acting surprised that anyone noticed. In both cases, the message is the same. I belong at this party. I just don't have to say it out loud. Is it ridiculous? Perhaps, but no more than pretending you didn't refresh your inbox 10 times waiting for that dinner party Evite. Human nature, after all, hasn't changed much. It's just traded paper for emails. Of course, you may be thinking, all this sounds exhausting. And it was. But it was also empowering in its own odd way. These women knew their tools. They studied the field. They played the long game like absolute tacticians in 9-gourd full skirts. So next time you're trying to get into that proverbial room where it all happens, channel your inner Edwardian Miss Lillian Green. Don't shout. Leave your card. Straighten your hat. Compliment the floral arrangements and vanish gracefully into the garden. Edwardian networking was a high-wire act in heeled boots and corset stays. You had to balance charm and restraint without ever looking like you were rehearsed. So, Next time you're angling for that invite, be it at a gala, a garden party, or even a ball, remember Miss Lillian Green. She didn't hustle, she hovered. So remember to straighten your hat, place your calling card just so, and let the right people notice. Because real influence, it's never begged for, it's invited in. And if you must post about it later, do so without tags, Edwardian style. And with that, if you enjoyed this genteel dive into Edwardian manipulation disguised as manners, come back and watch my next video, rule number 2. Until next time, may your invitations always arrive unrequested and your charm remain entirely effortless.